Welcome to all. This is the panel on AI applications for good in government. We're going to talk about a lot of good and maybe even touch on things that might not be so good, or at least things that we ought to be considering. But first, let me introduce the panel members. Ms. Cheryl Ingstad, Director of Office of Artificial Intelligence and Technology Office at the Department of Energy. Ms. Amanda Mercier, who is Azure Lead Data Scientist, Azure Special Capabilities, Infrastructure and Innovation Team at Microsoft, and Mr. Jonathan Alboum, who is the Principal Digital Strategist in the Federal Digital Strategist, Principal Digital Strategist, Federal Government at ServiceNow. I'm so sorry, Jonathan. I owe you some more coffee. By the way, you're on mute there.
I'll take more coffee.
All right. Okay. Well, let me start with just a basic question here. I think is really important to toss out there, just so everyone is on the same page. And I'm going to throw this one over to you, Amanda, and ask you to just kind of baseline, give us a 101 on what artificial intelligence, machine learning is. We did a poll. I don't know if you saw it. A lot of folks out there that have some understanding of a lot of them that really just have a cursory awareness. And so we thought we'd just start with a baseline.
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, we'll be very gentle, and we can go as deep as people prefer. But machine learning is basically the study of computer algorithms that allow computer programs to automatically improve through experience. So instead of hard coding everything in and telling it exactly what to do in every scenario, we continue to expose it to additional scenarios so that it can find its own way. It's a branch of artificial intelligence that we expect will achieve artificial intelligence. That's what machine learning is, because a lot of times those phrases are used interchangeably. There's lots of different types of machine learning. If you've heard of supervised and unsupervised machine learning, computer vision, natural language processing, reinforcement learning, these are all just types of machine learning. And artificial intelligence is the science and engineering of making computers behave in ways that until recently we thought only humans could accomplish these feats. So that's kind of a really high level overview of what it is.
Wow. Okay. And I've heard the term singularity. Where does that fit into this, right? Is that sort of the ultimate AI? What is that?
I'm sure there's lots of different definitions, but everyone is always looking for a single button push solution. Right. And I think that's really where the breakdown comes in, is understanding how AI ML techniques can get us closer to reducing the cognitive load on both our government employees as well as our warfighters, and allowing them to focus on the things that really computers cannot achieve, the creativity and some of the problem-solving skills that we rely on humans for.
Amen. And really, let's take the robot out of the human, let the human do the higher value stuff, and let the robots do what they do, so to speak. I say robots loosely.
Luke, I just want to add one comment to what Amanda said, and I thought that was a good definition. But, AI, it's not an end state, because, as she, I think, correctly stated, it is one of these things that is a point in time. There was a point in time where a computer playing chess was something that a human could do, right? And it was revolutionary. It was artificial intelligence, and now a chess program is, a basic feature of any operating system. So it's no longer one of those things that is demonstrating that a computer can think like a human. That's passé. What's the next thing, right? And it'll continue to evolve over time. And what we think AI is today will not qualify as AI in the future. So it's a continuum. And I think that's an important, notation here. It's not an end state. It is really a journey.
Very, very good point. It's a point in time. When we saw that whole Watson thing, we're like, wow, and then there was the AlphaGo. And for those that may have not seen that documentary. You should watch it. It's really fascinating, not just about the technology, but about sort of the human element and sort of what happens when this technology starts to advance and sort of the emotional aspects of it. It's pretty interesting. Why don't you tell us, Jonathan, just so we're sort of, situationally aware, what is not AI and ML? We hear AI, ML, and it's sort of a journey. What is clearly sort of, let's reverse that for a minute. Is there stuff that just that people get confused?
Sure. Sometimes, RPA, robotic process automation, comes up, and people are suggesting this is AI or ML like even. And in my experience, it's not. It's the ability. These technologies give you the ability to quickly intake data, maybe get it into some sort of workflow or processing. It's certainly automating a task that was previously manual, but I think that's the answer here. AI and ML is not just strictly automation. It is going beyond automation into the learning Amanda described, or something that looks like thinking to a human. So it's not a rote process.
Bingo. Well, let me bring.
Could I jump in there,
Of
Luke?
course, absolutely. You are the
comment.
expert.
I've run into that too, where a lot of people may think that robotic process automation is really AI, and when you get down to it, it's about process automation and optimization of a process. And really, I think with AI, and we have a whole section of our strategy, one strategic goal, which is really all about applying AI to drive efficiencies in the organization, and really focused on business operations. So that's where you get into this area where there can be possible confusion with what is just simply automating a process, and then what is really like a big data analytics project, perhaps, where you are applying predictive analytics and using AI to now help that office completely change a procedure or a process that they had before, because now they have insights from the data that they could only have derived through an AI tool.
Right, and with sort of mountains and mountains, zettabytes, we'll call them, of data, right? You need these powerful machines to sort of do some of that compute, analyze, and thinking, if you will. Well, while we have you on the mic here, Cheryl, wanted to bring up a couple of points. One, for those that may not have seen the executive order 13859 issued in 2019, they're going to throw it out there on the chat. Interesting executive order, kind of laid out sort of the groundwork, sort of the gauntlet, if you will, from the executive office on AI. And then just recently, I guess back in February of this year, there was an annual report that was published. Not a hard read, so I think it's 20 some pages, but a lot of good information in there. And I know, and one of the things they call out is Department of Energy, and actually your office that you stood up, et cetera. Why don't you give us a top line on sort of, how did the Department of Energy come to the conclusion that, hey, we need to stand up an organic, sort of independent, if you will, AI office, which you haven't seen a whole lot. You've seen some, obviously. We all talk about the Jake, et cetera, but also your participation in the rest of that sort of AI ecosystem that's going on across the federal government. Oh,
sure. Well, I'm glad you asked, because obviously not happening in a vacuum, right? So you have the President's Executive Order, which OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, should be commended for drafting, which is all about how to drive American AI leadership. And in there, if you read the executive order, also relatively short, as you mentioned, you can really see how much focus that they're placing on areas like R&D investment in AI, and the requirement to have action plans around AI, and then the importance of preparing the workforce and training the workforce for these AI changes that are coming as well. And then you have the National Security Council AI Commission also studying AI and doing 6 quarterly reports, which we're more than halfway through right now. And as you mentioned too, also making recommendations about our office. And so that's happening in the ecosystem. And then we have within the Department of Energy, we've been hard at work doing AI for decades, actually. And what they came to see, what the leadership came to understand, was that it's actually happening in many parts of the organization, and then not so much in other parts of the organization. And also it was hard to determine, like where's the dashboard, where's a report on what are all the AI activities. And they understood that, as you mentioned, in light of the executive order, that this is too important for us to not really have clear visibility so that we can make good decisions, so that we can use all the resources that DOE has to drive American AI leadership. And so our office was stood up in September of 2019, or created. I arrived in February, and we've created a 6-point strategy, which is, number one, about our coordination functions. So bringing together in our database, we already have over 600 projects in there, AI projects that are across the 17 national labs, and then also the program offices here in headquarters. And then another area of our focus, as I mentioned, was driving efficiencies with already, approved AI tools that are out there. And then also workforce strategy, and also data. And I hope we'll talk about data today and how important data and AI tools and access to those tools are. And then these what we call cross-cutting projects. So we have a couple of those that we've also just recently launched. And then all of this together, bringing that information together through a coordinating committee so that leadership can make the best decisions, is what's really going to drive American AI leadership.
With these powerful technologies, you really need to be thoughtful in regards to the I'll call it the governance structure. I hate to use that word, but to really think through how you want to attack this and organize it so that you're getting the most out of it, but also certainly the most we'll say proper use out of an alignment. Now, you all stood up your AI center. There's obviously the Jake over at DoD. I'm sure we'll hear about that on the other panel. Do you know of any other agencies, any other departments that have stood up a similar organization?
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because part of our coordination function is not just internal to pull together all of these AI activities going on within DOE, but also to share and learn from our counterparts outside in other government agencies. So I know at the VA they do. I know of course, in DOD, Jake is a very good, strong partner with us. GSA is the AI Center of Excellence. So we definitely have counterparts there. And, in NIST, we have some very good counterparts in their AI office. So it depends, as you look across the government, sometimes there isn't just a clear AI office yet. Sometimes you have to look in the CIO's office to find who they maybe have tagged with that responsibility.
Yeah, it reminds me of the chief data officer, right? I mean, it was sort of pockets of sort of a checkered kind of configuration, and eventually OMB said, no, we're gonna require every agency to appoint a chief data officer. And seems to me, though, that you can easily see this eventually happening with sort of the whole AI space, right? It makes a lot of sense to me. Well, one of the things that we want to talk about, obviously, this panel is AI for good, but there's also the sort of the AI, what you need to watch out for. And we're going to start with some of those subjects just to get those sort of highlighted and understood as we work our way through all the other various subjects, including a lot of fantastic use cases that we'll get into in a moment. But let's talk about again, I'll call it I don't want to call it the AI, not for good, but it's more what to watch out for. And I think about things like the, protection of algorithms. I think about the misuse of AI potentially. You always hear about things like, biased, unconscious bias type stuff, et cetera. So those are, just various topics of, once you have a very powerful technology, how are you being thoughtful and making sure that everything is being used and tightened up and protected the way it should be? Who wants to start on that? I'm going to ask all three of you. So Who'd like to
I'd like to start real quick and just build on what Cheryl was talking about and you, Luke, around data. I think it's very difficult to make sure that you know as much as you can about the data that you're using to train these algorithms. It's very easy for that data to be not exactly what you think, or not understand how it had been manipulated or combined with other data sets over time. And then you feed it into an algorithm, and the output might not be exactly what you expected. You mentioned bias. That's one risk. You might also get some outputs that are incompatible with the original data set, because you have enhanced that data in ways that was not documented. So that lineage and that data provenance is so important, and you can't really go all in, I think, unless you have that strong data governance mentality inside your organization. And I was going to ask Cheryl when she was talking before, if, as they stood up that Center of Excellence, if they stood up a data component. She mentioned that, but curious if there is a robust governance, lineage, provenance kind of process, so people know the history of the data.
Luke, did you want me to respond to that?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, Jonathan. So, really good question. So we have created that part of our strategy, and I haven't yet hired up for it, so we haven't launched it yet. But I can mention a few things what I do foresee. So I absolutely would imagine that we will have a few aspects to this. So one starts with making data available. Really understanding what are the priority data sets and how do we share those among those that should have access. Those users that should have access across the lab. The 17 national labs that we have. And then also, there might be users here at headquarters who would or should have access to it. And then how do we, as you mentioned, when we talk about security, that's not only about security on the system and security of the users, but the data. And then this crosses over into, the threat of adversarial AI. How do we really know the data provenance, and how can we ensure that? What are the methodologies that we'll create and the best practices that we could adopt here? What kind of a checklist could we apply to it to review these data sets before we say, yep, they're good enough, they're safe, they're secure, and that goes really the same for not only how do we share our data across the organization, because it is a lot of work to put together these data sets, and it is a lot of work to ensure that they're secure and do all of these checks, right? It's the same for also the tools. So if you look at the AI models that are created, so many of them are created and not shared, but they really could be applied to many other optimization functions. So how do we share those tools? And again, back to, I think, this question about ensuring what is the provenance of how they were made, what kind of training data were they used with, and was there any bias in those training sets? And and I really I have this analogy that is sort of like, it goes back to the old days when you go to the tool shed and you check out a tool, and the things that you should expect, that the tool is in good working order, that there's a manual that comes with it so that you know how to operate it, and there's warnings along with it. So, it's been checked, maintained, all of that. Now you can check it out and you can use it. So how do we get to this point of sharing the data and the tools? But really, like you said, taking those measures to make sure that we also have the security around the data and in the models that we use.
Cheryl, you used a phrase there that I just want to get a little bit more definition on for the listening audience. You said adversarial AI. Can you just define that a little bit, just so the listening audience understands sort of the concept behind that?
Sure. I think it's something that actually we need to do a lot more education on, and that's what we plan. We have a sixth area of our strategy that is really about cross-cutting projects, and One of those, I'm just hiring up someone to lead our adversarial AI effort. And one component of that will be the education, not just actually creating and executing a strategy around it. But the what we're really talking about here is the potential for an adversary to corrupt our data sets or to corrupt the models that we use. And so adversarial AI is something that I think people haven't thought about a lot. They buy their data sets. They don't really know where they came from. They may create with a bunch of other scientists or people on their team all contribute to a data set and really don't know what the data provenance is and do they really have security around that data set once they've built it as well. And then that goes the same for the AI models. A lot of times we just start applying these models and we really have very little information about them. So these the potential for an attack to be built into our models or our data, I think we need to be very aware of.
Yeah, so it's the integrity of that environment. It's back to that tool shed analogy, right? When you grab that tool, you want to know that it's safe to use, it's in good working order, it's going to do what it's intended to do, etc.
And there's some instructions, around like this tool is meant to be used in this way for this problem set, right?
Right. Amanda, let me ask you, I know you have extensive background and the AI activities there at Microsoft, and certainly prior to Microsoft as well. What's your sense of this subject before we sort of, walk over into the good part of AI? I just want to get your perspective on sort of, things to think about as we all embark on this journey, things that you all have thought about in regards to things to watch out for.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I think, we're in this phase where we've seen how technology can be used for good and for bad. You have the internet and then you have this rise of cybersecurity. Now we understand the importance of cybersecurity, how that can be making our systems secure and keeping us safe and keeping our finances and health information, all of that secure. But we've also seen the failures and what that can do to us. I think we can learn from that, and hopefully as we approach AI ML activities, we can take the same kind of posture in enacting our ability to protect our algorithms and our models. Microsoft actually just wrote a paper, I think they shared it in the chat, where we interviewed 28 organizations. And as a result of that interview, they were not really equipped with the tactical or strategic tools to protect, to detect, and to respond to these attacks. So we're starting this journey of how to get better by at least enumerating the gaps and then engaging researchers to start to understand how we can start to fill those gaps. Because sometimes just detecting that it's been compromised can be a very challenging task.
Sure. Lot to think about there. And it's particularly as this whole activity moves so quickly, right? As you pointed out, as Jonathan pointed out, this is a very much a moving subject, right? This isn't a stagnant, it's sort of done type thing.
And even without like an adversary, there's something as benign as a concept of model drift, where the model has been deployed and it was tuned for a very specific function. But as the world around us evolves, we need to keep bringing it back to ground truth. And that also is something that we're looking at.
Let me just add one idea into this, a risk I think that's out there. As soon as an agency or an organization starts to make decisions using these algorithms, and that decision, think about a government use case, is for determining who gets a benefit or who gets a loan or some kind of decision that today there's a human involved. When that decision doesn't go my way and I'm angry about it and I sue you and I want my benefit and I challenge you to tell me where the data came from and tell me how the model evolved and tell me all these things, and you can't, well, now every decision that algorithm has made or has been involved in is going to be called into question, and there will be a field day for attorneys and legal fees and all these things. And agencies will get bombarded by these kinds of by these kinds of requests and lawsuits and whatever. So, I worry about that as a risk. One, agencies need to be able to operate successfully, and a thing like that will certainly get in their way. But at the same time, I worked in the government for many years, and we have a risk aversion at times that can trump new technologies and innovation. So all it's going to take is for some agency to take that extra step and for the result not to work out. And God forbid it's in a war-fighting situation and people die. A terrible scenario, right? But imagine that happens. And we decide we can't continue to invest and put our money here because of a bad outcome. And I think we should be talking about the risks of these kinds of risks, because they will impact our ability to continue forward with and advance this technology and be able to use it in the good ways that we're here to talk about.
Right, and undoubtedly, we know that we'll call them our competitors, our adversaries, whatever you want to call them, are not going to allow those things to slow them down. And it's interesting, Amanda, you brought up the drift issue, right? And that's a really good point, right? We think about, okay, these four sharp corners here, and the adversary gets there, manipulates the model, and that's what we got to protect. And this is sort of like the guard gates and locks kind of situation that we had in the cyber arena. And then we realized, no, it's these slow, oozy, leaking, things out the back door that are really going to eat our lunch and did eat our lunch, right? The collateral systems, et cetera. A whole nother subject. Let's get into AI for good. And I'm going to ask you, Amanda, to start with that. That's a neat concept. It sounds great. It's probably a big subject. Why don't you just tell us, when I say AI for good, what does that mean to you? What does that mean to Microsoft? What should it mean to everybody?
Sure, thanks, Luke. So there's this First Five consortium. It's comprised of government, industry, and academia, and they aim to mitigate the impact of natural disasters through the application of technology. It was actually developed in response to a White House humanitarian assistance and disaster response call back in January of 2020. Again, it's mainly a response to, there were 14 natural disasters that occurred in 2019, each of those costing the taxpayers more than $1 billion each. So are there ways that we can employ AI to help us overcome some of these really cost prohibitive activities that allow us to recover from disaster? And a couple of examples would be using AI to detect fire lines. That's a hard problem for boots on the ground folks that are fighting these large wildfires. Can we start to use AI to maybe predict food shortages as a result of unemployment from COVID? Can we start to understand how all of these things play together now that we have COVID and maybe there's a threat of hurricane? What would the evacuation routes look like, and how would the COVID type infection rates impact that? Can we make better decisions using the data that we have at our disposal?
Yeah, very powerful solution sets there on big problems and really important ones.
Another is search and rescue. If you have these disasters that happen and then you need to go find people that need to be rescued, can we use AI to help us do that quickly and efficiently so that we can put our people to work in the right way?
Right. And, it's interesting because we think about, how in the world could you use AI? Well, there's a lot of instrumentation out there, right? There's a lot of IoT. Every device, every car is a sensor or a group of sensors, right? There's a lot of data coming in, and there's lots of opportunities to now use these models to analyze that data, do predictive analysis, et cetera, et cetera. The world is full of endless great possibilities. I'm going to throw it over to Cheryl because I can't imagine that DOE is not cooking up some heavy duty stuff over there. And we'll love for you to give us, 2 or 3 examples of some of the things that DOE is up to that is for the greater good of DoD or DOE and probably for mankind in general.
Oh, yes. Well, we have everything from AI at play trying to determine applied to seismic activities so we can predict earthquakes, to all and just a number of COVID efforts. So, really every lab immediately stood up after COVID hit our country and has been providing new insights due to by applying the AI algorithms that they have, the data sets that they have in their possession as well, and also kind of working together as a consortium with universities and so forth. So they're really in the fight there, and that's exciting to see. And in fact, even our office launched a really major project with COVID. It's actually called Covet Insights. And it's a partnership between the VA and HHS. And that's where we're taking the massive health data sets that the VA has and also HHS. And it's truly unprecedented. We've never brought federal data like this together in the healthcare sphere to analyze it, to solve a really major problem like this pandemic. And then that's where we're placing it at one of the labs in a secure data enclave. And the exciting part about having that at a lab is that we also have the multidisciplinary teams that can study the information. We have the AI specialists who create the models, and it's co-located with a supercomputer to do all of the computation. So it's really an amazing array of technologies and expertise that are brought together to solve problems. So very excited about that as well. And then First Five, I'm so glad Amanda mentioned that. Our office is the co-chair with Microsoft on the First Five consortium. So, and that's all about saving lives. So people have asked me, how did you choose on the first two projects that you launched in your office? And I said, well, they're both about saving lives. So that's also AI force for good.
Well, as a former EMT, I certainly do appreciate that. But let's give a definition to the audience on First Five. What does that mean? What's the concept behind that?
Well, you know what the First Five is, how it got its name, is that the first responders told us. And so, in addition to this grand consortium of academia, companies, government agencies, by the way, it's not just Department of Energy, but Department of Defense, U.S. Forest Service, NOAA is in this as well. But it's first responders. So in partnership with first responders, we asked them, what's most important to you? When do you have to have this information? And they said, the first 5 minutes. The first 5 minutes of a disaster, we need to know, where to go, where is that fire line? That's what matters the most. So that's how it got its name, First Five.
I really appreciate that. I spent many years working at USDA. I was the CIO for the Department of Agriculture. I worked closely with the Forest Service. And you are absolutely correct that, there are split-second decisions that those firefighters make during the course of a fire that can save lives and property. And if they have the right data and they can use the models quickly, and you have to be able to get the information to the people on the fire line, which is another challenge, right? Being able to communicate. But if you can make those, help them make better decisions, then, you can have a dramatically positive effect. And you can have a terribly negative effect if you can't use that data properly. So I think so many times it's, let's help the human make a better decision using these technologies and data and getting to them quickly. To me, that is an overarching theme for where we are right now, and I think where we will be with AI over the coming years, in the next few years. And that's a real force for good. Let's make better decisions. Let's enhance the human.
Yes, better decisions, more informed decisions, more timely decisions, right? Can I get that information to the firefighter on the way to the building that's burning, right?
Right.
Et cetera, et cetera. And I know, Amanda, I see you nodding your head there. I know you all were a big part of sort of the engine and the juice and the activity and resources around the First Five projects. So we certainly do appreciate that. Any comments you want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I'm just really excited for us to tackle some of these, like Cheryl said, life-saving challenges. That's the thing that we are most motivated by. There's other things that we can do, AI for good. Sustainability is one of them. Understanding how to really use our resources well. The list goes on, but we're just really excited to engage here.
And if I could come back to one other thing, Luke, sometimes, using AI for good can be maybe a little more mundane. Saving lives obviously is great, but sometimes it's just about, providing a good service. We've all sat on the phone with a cable company or a credit card company or whoever trying to get service, and our question can't get answered properly, or we are misdirected 2 or 3 times. There's so much data about us in these systems already, and if you have some kind of intelligent automation, we talked about RPA before, but I'm talking about something that is using data and some kind of machine learning to help the people who are providing service make better decisions. Sometimes it might be get that call routed to the person who already has knowledge on this subject. Maybe it's pop up similar cases in front of a customer service rep so they can help you more quickly, or maybe it's a chatbot, a virtual agent that can be very helpful and prevent you from having to get on the phone with somebody in the first place. So there's a lot of this idea of using data, machine learning, what we're calling AI today, to help people. Spans from get my question answered fast and get service to save a life. So it's a wide spectrum. And I think it just goes to show that this is a technology or set of technologies that's becoming pervasive in our life for big things and little things. And, I think that's just an important perspective. It's not science fiction. It's science now. And it's you see it in big and small ways every day. It's not.
Right. And I no doubt, undoubtedly, you all are incorporating it into a lot of your tool sets, right? To provide
at ServiceNow, there's AI and ML capabilities built into the core ServiceNow platform. That's the basis for all the workflows we create. So it's accessible to people who are not data scientists, who aren't developers, in low code, no code ways. So, it's that, tipping point where it becomes something that we are all taking advantage of. I think
and sometimes in not so obvious ways, other times very obvious. I was moderating a discussion on AI, I don't know, a month ago, and somebody brought up some analysis that was done on in the finance area, and they were just looking at improper payments, et cetera, in a said company, and $100 million they were able to pull out of that, right? By things that just weren't obvious, that they were able to take this data and do this higher order analysis. And boy, I tell you, that's talk about solving a real problem. That's certainly a good one. Let's talk about AI ready workforce, right? There's a lot of this technology. It's extremely powerful, right? And, in order to take advantage of it, we've got to have folks that can not only build algorithms and, build models, et cetera, but just the general use of it and be aware of what it's capable of doing. Cheryl, let me start with you in regards to just sort of the workforce issue.
Oh, yeah, that's actually, we have a number of people on our team who have a tremendous amount of passion around that one. And actually, it's when I first got here and I, went around the headquarters and then spoke to, each lab director, I got so much demand. I really got to hear from them straight up how important AI training was. So many requests for AI training. So we have created our first AI training module, which we're going to execute on this fall. But that's just a first start, like a deposit, if you will, to begin with, on the rest of executing the strategy. So we're just also hiring up a leader who will be arriving at the end of the month to lead our AI ready workforce to develop the strategy. And we look forward to having a number of partners within the department, external to the department, also within other government agencies here. And I think a few things I'd like to mention is that AI workforce and AI ready workforce is not just about training, although training is an extremely important part of it. It's also about creating for our department AI career pathways, because what I also got to hear was that our nuclear physicists and our chemists and our biologists felt that they were managing their data. They were spending too much of their time managing data. and too much of their time becoming semi-AI experts so that they could apply AI to their data. And that's where really I think we need to look at creating AI career pathways, and that's going to be critical for us. And we have a new leader coming on board to head that up.
Well, if there's nothing we haven't learned on this panel, it's DOE is hiring, that's for sure.
Yeah. May I add just one more point, is that with the 17 national labs, we also have this hope, which is that actually that we're not only creating AI training for our workforce, but that because we have things like at the Oak Ridge National Lab, we have the manufacturing demonstration facility, and we have a number of similar type facilities across and with different focus areas across the 17 national labs, that we could actually create training for the American workforce that could be validated there where we have demonstration facilities, and then it could be packaged up and shared more broadly with American societies. So we also have that in our scopes.
Fantastic. Amanda, I know that you've stood up a center there, or I'm not sure if it's a center or an entity there, and you certainly had done in your former life. Give us a little bit of context on what one needs to be thinking about as far as an AI-enabled workforce, an AI-informed workforce.
Yeah, thank you. So to Cheryl's point, having AI career paths is important, and I think some of us might think it's to the exclusion of anyone except hands-on keyboard AI developers, right? And that's not the case. In fact, any level of fluency with respect to machine learning and AI will assist you in being able to work with your peers that are maybe applying them more rigorously. So I think we should really think about AI ready as being a full spectrum of skills. And no matter where you fall on that spectrum, it is a discipline that you undertake every day because the field is changing rapidly. So just as quickly as we've seen a rise of AI technology, the employment of it, the changing of it, and it being more rigorous and more capable, that has to happen throughout changes in academic research. So just reading papers on it, just hearing people talk about it, the more education that you can get, the better, because it's always a development process. Even for, I'm still reading journal articles every day. So I'm always learning about the newest, latest advancements. So I would just encourage people to continue that as a discipline.
It's an incremental learning process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it never really ends, for sure.
Jonathan, you were going to point out?
Yeah, I was going to say, look, just on the other side of the AI training pieces, well, what do we do with people who, perform tasks before, and the automation that can come from AI and the capabilities that can come from AI displace those employees? There's a separate conversation, but related, around reskilling people so they can have an important role in a new organization. I don't think that automation replaces people per se; it replaces tasks. And when you think about it like that, there are I think you can position this whole thing as being very much in line with the OMB President's Management Agenda concept of let's move to higher value work for people. But still, that's change, and that change might mean there's new training or other kinds of things. It's not exactly AI training, but it might be more the ability to use the output of an algorithm to do investigative work, or to look at trends so you can make better policy decisions for your program or something. So there's a kind of an ancillary set of training that I think agencies have to be equally focused on. So these investments we make that produce data, that provide insights, get used to their maximum potential.
Right, and there's that whole reskilling dynamic. And on the other dimension, as all of us know, have worked in the federal community in various levels. There's always all that unmet demand, right? Mm-hmm. And this is where these kinds of capabilities can allow us to reach into that unmet demand and finally start to answer the mail, so to speak, for an old metaphor about trying to address that citizen experience, whatever that may be, right? And we can name 100 of them. Let me jump back to AI for good for a minute. I'm looking in the chat at some questions here. And one we almost touched on, but we didn't quite, and that is smart cities. And I know that's another fantastic area, right? That's getting, has a lot of promise, and AI really sort of stepping up to the plate on that. Who wants to take a stab at some of the smart city activity that's going on? Amanda, let's start with you, and then we'll throw it over to you, Cheryl.
Did you have a particular, it's kind of a broad topic, curious if you had any point?
No, I think what they're just asking about is, in regards to incorporating AI to develop smart cities seems like a reality, interesting area with a lot of potential use cases. And they're just curious to know, what activity maybe Microsoft's doing in regards to that. Cheryl, what activity is DOE doing, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I think, some of our sustainability work is worth mentioning here. So we're really looking at holistically how we can make better decisions using energy, and also in the creation of energy and things like farming, how we can make our farming practices better as well. So how to utilize our resources best and maximize production without making any climate change decisions, making climate change worse. So I think that's kind of how we plug in. There's lots of different ways that it can assist people in their lives, though.
So you're taking it from the city to the planet Earth, so to speak, right? And that's impressive. Cheryl, smart cities, is there any work going on with smart cities as far as DOE is concerned?
Oh, yeah, plenty. And multiple labs are involved in efforts around smart cities. So maybe I'd back up to smart cities need to have power, right? Energy. And so I'd back up even to smart grid. So all the projects that we have going on around how to bring renewables, and I'm so glad that Amanda mentioned renewables and addressing climate change. So there's a lot of work on how to bring renewables onto the grid, and it's really AI that's going to fuel those developments. Batteries, how to use batteries in new and novel ways, how to create new materials for batteries. You would think that might be just a mining or a processing area, but actually it's applying AI to materials development for batteries. So, and then if we look at the grid and how AI is being applied for the security of the grid, and that's really around determining anomalies and other kinds of potential attacks, so securing that power for the city. And then that's the generation part. But then there's this aspect of it, which I've talked to a number of the experts in our organization, and they say this, that the future for delivering power is going to be dependent on AI, because we cannot continue into the future relying on peak power. We have to be able to manage it at the consumption, at the area of the level or the point of consumption. Well, the point of consumption is out there in the smart cities. It's at the factories, it's at the offices, it's at people's homes, it's in vehicles. And it's only really through AI that they'll be able to monitor that point of usage and be able to make those puts and takes, if you will, where there are periods where they can take energy from those points of consumption and deliver as at other points. When they need energy, they can take it. When they have to deliver, they can deliver. So, and then again, back to batteries will be critical to this. So we have a huge battery project going on among multiple elements within the Department of Energy.
Yeah, meeting the consumption where they are, so to speak, and certainly micro generation and some of those other things, I'm sure fall into play there. Well, we've got a chat here from a former colleague of mine and of Jonathan's, fellow CIO. Users need access to data. So this one's coming to you, Jonathan. And of course, Mr. Cooper, always having a very wise and thoughtful type of question here. Users need access to data of value with regards to mitigation strategies to address risk What is good enough?
I think that is a good question. And, I would expect nothing less than from Steve.
Steve is the master.
Right. So I think that it comes down to understanding what the risk is and being able to quantify it, or at least understand it in a qualitative way. And then, like any risk decision a CIO has to make, you can accept risk, you can do things to mitigate that risk. So what is the impact of using the wrong data? And I think that you have to, or sharing data in a way where it could be misinterpreted, misunderstood, misused. And if you're not having that risk conversation at a data governance board or, in some other kind of, maybe within Cheryl's AI organization, you don't really have the ability to make, the right decision for that data set, because it's not a one size fits all. It's going to vary based on the circumstances and based on the impact. So we want to edge towards getting data to people. But if you have to have the conversation about, if I get this data to the wrong person, what happens? If the data is used in the wrong way, what happens? And then make your ultimate decision that way. I just want to go back to one thing on smart cities. I just wanted to share real quick. I think that the goal for a smart city ultimately is this idea of anticipatory government, where, based on the data from sensors, based on the machine learning that occurs from past incidents and other things, I can begin to anticipate where a city might have traffic problems, where it might have the need for maintenance of a bridge or for a road, or I can send resources to a location because I am looking at the data and I can make these predictions based on things that have happened in the past. And the government can anticipate problems and solve them before they happen. And I think that is one of the values of AI as applied to the smart city. So I know that's not the data question, but I just wanted to get that out there. But on the data, it's about risk and understanding the risk and making good decisions based on your.
Yeah, I'd love to chime in on Jonathan's data conversation. That was really great, Jonathan. I think one of the things that Microsoft is doing is to have an ethics board. We call it Ether. And so while you talk about, we talk about everything from a benign risk to an adversarial risk to maybe just unconscious bias. And I think making sure that our AI ready workforce is diverse so that we can hold each other accountable and we hear each other's perspectives is really important. And it's something that Microsoft has taken very seriously. Every AI project that we do, we have this board available to us so that we can both share our data, our assumptions, and then also our algorithms, so that we have another set of eyes that are trained at trying to pick up these unconscious biases. And then also, to Jonathan's point, identifying specifically what the risks are and making sure that we're thinking outside of the box of the more obvious. What are the secondary risk and the third order risk? Because we really want to make sure we're comprehensive in applying this appropriately.
Gosh, I'm going to say it again. That drift issue you brought up is a great one, because you see so much of those types of activities going on. Well, I'm going to bounce around a little bit. Let me ask this question. I'm going to sort of box it a little bit into federal agencies here, if I may, to the person that submitted the question. But it's data underpins so much of AI adoption. We touched on this for a minute. What progress has been made to install chief data officers within the federal agencies? What should be their biggest priority? And I guess the way I want to frame that is, obviously there's been a mandate now to appoint a chief data officer, right? And I'm going to ask each one of you from your various hats, where does the chief, obviously data being a big part of the whole AI play, where does the chief data officer fit in this AI journey that any agency is going on?
Sure. I'm a member of the data governance board at the department, and our chief data officer is the chief financial officer as well. So, and then a number of probably at least a dozen plus members on the data governance board. So I think number one is really what data sets are we talking about? So identifying those data sets and then determining, what type of a data maturity model should we adopt here so that we can have a goal for wherever we are with these data sets. What is the next thing to do? Now that we've identified these data sets, what is the next thing to do? And what do we do after that?
If I may, is that the role of your chief data officer to do that and sort of bring that community together? Is that how that's working?
Right. Correct. Yeah.
Fantastic. Amanda, what are you observing sort of, in your sphere as you're working with various agencies?
Yeah, I think a data officer is really key. Everyone has talked on it on the board already, and it's that full spectrum of not only identifying the data, obtaining rights and accesses to the data, making sure that you curate the data and identify any anomalies or problematic patterns, because some data has certain gaps or certain patterns that you can use it still, but being aware of it allows you to use it better. I also think, data being the front end of the machine learning pipeline, a complement to a chief data officer that I think is really important is this test and evaluation function, because so often our ability to really have a machine learning capability that satisfies the user depends on what we optimize on. And so making sure that we define these test and evaluation metrics so that we're shooting at the same target and that target is actually satisfying the user needs. I think, having these types of roles all the way throughout that machine learning lifecycle is not only an indicator of maturity for each federal agency or each company that you deal with, but it also allows us to really make those smart decisions we've been talking about in employing AI well, avoiding the bias and quantifying and mitigating those risks whenever we can.
Making sure those checks and balances are in place. Jonathan, did you all have a chief data officer over at?
Yeah, we did, but it's really interesting how the role evolved over the past several years. Right. So when I was at USDA, we had someone in that role, and their primary function at that point was to understand the data we had in the agency. And to Steve's question from before, a lot of what they focused on was getting data out to people. So it was much more focused on the concept of open data as opposed to data governance, and it was about the data we had access to from the CIO office, which now USDA has taken a great, they have an excellent chief data officer. They've taken a lead in the government, in my opinion, around some of these data topics. So it's exciting to see, but they've grown and they're more focused on, let's get this program data from, multiple mission areas, and can we get some value out of putting that together? And well, that's not necessarily AI. It might be analytics or some other, precursor step. It's a important foundation to do bigger things with that data over time, and then take it from there. Well, USDA data and HHS data have some natural connections. Can we look at those and expand that and think about a government-wide data set that is across multiple programs and multiple agencies, and can you get value out of that? Maybe fraud detection, proper payments, patient care, identifying, at-risk populations. And, I think we're taking some nice steps. One of the challenges, I think, at any agency is making sure the chief data officer is in the right place in the agency. Previously there was not necessarily an OMB top-down focus on data and chief data officers. So without that, sometimes it was a struggle to have that conversation from the IT organization with the program. They're very protective of data at times, and understandably so. So the question is, from my perspective, should the chief data officer be in that IT organization reporting to a CIO, or maybe, as Cheryl indicated, positioned outside of the CIO office and maybe in an elevated position, in this case, maybe a CFO, maybe in a deputy secretary office or some other thing where there's greater visibility across the department, the large organization, and with that comes maybe more access to data and different data sets that just accelerates this whole process. So it's evolving.
I think that's the point you're making is a good one. The role is evolving. Well, let me throw one last question out here, and it's from my good friend Brenda Smith over at the Office of Trade and Customs and Border Protection. And for those that might not know what that is, I always keep it simple. That's the organization that's right smack in the middle of the economy of the United States of America. So greetings, thanks for your great insights. Would be interested in how to educate organizations best about the potential of AI so that good use cases can be brainstormed for practical and valuable applications of AI, right? So early in the adoption there, how does one sort of inform the leadership about all the potential of AI, knowing that, maybe they're starting at zero? Cheryl, let me ask you first. I'm going to go around the horn on this one. It'll be our last question.
That is a really good question. I think through, on one hand, demonstrating a very strong strategy, but also with some clear examples, when you present to the leadership, we're already, we've made great strides in AI, and here are some great examples of how we're improving crop yields, or how we're managing the grid with AI, so that I think providing just really clear examples where they understand, that's not just statistics, that's not just powerful computing. That's actually AI at work, and we couldn't have gotten to that result without AI.
Right. Good. Amanda, I'm sure you've been through this more than once. What's the most effective way to do that, to sort of accelerate that knowledge for the decision makers so that they can get on the AI bus, let's call it?
Yeah, I love what Cheryl said. I think examples are key. Trying to find ways to make it tangible is important. And sometimes what's most important is translating real world examples that may have been publicized or commonly known, translating that to the domain in which the person you're talking to lives and breathes. So really understanding your audience will empower you to take these examples they've seen in the news and say, what would that look like apply to your problem, and trying to find ways to help them see what value it would provide in their domain, because oftentimes it's the people that have had a little more experience with AI that can make that leap a little bit quicker. So if you can provide those examples in spaces they care about, I think that's really, really key.
Right. It's great to talk about maintenance of jet aircraft engines, but if my CEO doesn't have jet aircraft engines in his portfolio, doesn't really ring the bell. Jonathan, bring us.
Yeah, so instead of just saying I absolutely agree, which I do, I want to just explain an approach to doing that I think would be really valuable. And you have to think about AI. We know it's a valuable tool, but people have to see the value. So I think it's very important you begin with a conversation about what are we going to get out of this? And then, follow through, create something, and be able to validate that you can make a better decision, or you can reach more people, you can have higher crop yields, and then tell that story, champion that success. If you do that within your agency, if you have a willing program to take a risk with you and try this out, and then you can tell that story, you're going to get other programs, other mission specific needs come at you and say, hey, let's do it for this one too. So it's having a value creation process and applying that to this particular technology.
So not just tell me, but also show me. Jonathan, thank you very much for your time. This has been super insightful. Amanda, you were awesome. Great insight there, and really do appreciate everything that Microsoft's doing. Jonathan, everything ServiceNow is doing and is going to do. And Cheryl, thank you so much for the entire team at DOE and the entire team that's going to be hired at DOE, and everything that you're doing over there is just awesome. We really do appreciate it. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, and thanks, Luke, to you and to our panelists. We were so grateful to have you guys here today, and that was really a wonderful discussion. I think we all learned a lot. And Luke, do you have any last words for us before we transition?
No, I guess other than, look, this is a big subject. It's a super important one. I'm glad to see that, one, you all are putting a platform out there so that we can discuss this, learn from it, be aware of it. And I think that, this is one that is one that we want to make sure that we keep on the books and continue to do, because it's a fast moving target, and there's going to be a lot of new, fresh emerging ideas, and I would urge HSDF and the entire community to continue to participate in this dialogue and learn from each other as this thing goes at Mach 3, so to speak. So thank you very much for having me.